Clifford. Really great to have you here. And I guess the community resilience, you know, has always been a really important topic, and always, you know, been really critical to unpack what it means, and particularly for kind of a city like London. But it does feel like the variety of resilience issues that kind of are literally hitting us and our communities and our organisations on a kind of almost a daily basis, ranging from kind of emergencies that you have to deal with in the hour to kind of wider emergencies like recovery from the pandemic and kind of climate emergency as well. And some of those things that we thought were on the long-term horizon are are really with us kind of in the day, so they're no longer risks but actual issues. I won't say any more about community resilience because I'm not best placed to talk about it. But yeah, over to you, Clifford, to take us through the kind of the emerging thinking from the GLA.
Thanks so much, Noel, and thank you everyone for being here and giving up your hour today to listen a bit about what's happening from the GLA on community resilience. And really today I'm really interested also in hearing from all of you in what you might be doing specifically on community resilience in each of your boroughs and the work that you do. So I've got some slides, but just to preface really before I go into these slides, we know right now that London is facing a number of challenges. So the climate adaptation, Noel touched on that, is a huge challenge that we will face. We are seeing more and more emergencies and emergency situations. Right now, for example, today, tomorrow and over the weekend, we have that heat health alert in place. It is essential when we consider emergencies, how we consider the community response, because communities will respond. People will support each other. Whether that's neighbour to neighbour, whether that is specifically community organisations or faith and belief organisations on the ground. And some of that those that I've noticed over the last kind of few days, there's been a number of emergencies that have really shown how people on the ground have responded so effectively and well in coordinating some of the support for people affected by emergencies. As we go into winter, we obviously know that the cost of living crisis is going to bite much more. We have, obviously, as we go into winter, significant chances of weather events, just like over summer, but colder weather events. And we have a number of kind of difficult resilience issues that we may face, including over the next few weeks, drought, and in winter, especially thinking about access to fuel and energy will become a very difficult kind of situation, perhaps. So I'll share some slides with you all and talk about what we're doing in the GLA to think about how we bring communities together. So this won't cover everything on resilience. It will focus specifically on community resilience, and I'll go a bit through what we mean by that. So, can everyone see my slides?
Yeah, that's great.
Great. This is the fancy new City Hall building, if any of you have been there yet. It's over in Newham now. So yeah, I'm Cliff Fleming. I'm from the GLA's resilience team, and as I said, thank you so much for being here. So today, really excited to be here at the London Policy and Strategy Network. What are kind of key objectives for today really is to hear about community resilience from the GLA, to have an opportunity to share understanding of community resilience and experiences of this across London and across boroughs, and to explore ways of working and engagement in this space. So questions to keep in mind as we move through this lunchtime. How do we currently work with communities and civil society in response to emergencies? Is a really important question, and everyone has a role in that. And what could support better engagement with communities and civil society? And what we mean by civil society, to unpack that term, is community groups, mutual aid groups, faith and belief organizations, places of worship, neighborhood associations, all sorts of how communities kind of organize themselves. So what is community resilience? So just to back up a little bit, emergencies are defined as an event or situation which threatens serious damage to human welfare in a place in the UK, the environment of a place in the UK, or the security of UK or of a place in the UK. So basically a serious event and often a shock to the system that we all need to work through. Increasingly, we are seeing more and more emergencies, whether that's climate-based emergencies or other emergencies. The aim of community resilience is to create a participatory approach to emergency management. That is because we have to work in reality. And in reality, everyone pulls together when there is an emergency. And we've seen that time and time again. People on the ground are there before even the flashing lights are there, before the fire brigade, before the police are there. People are there. Neighbours, residents, people affected, those who might be victims to a situation, those that might be witnesses to a situation are already there. And they will be there when everyone goes. So once those kind of rest centres and evacuation centres and others kind of start winding down, communities will be affected by what happens for a long time. Recovery is not easy, and recovery takes a long period of time. And of course, COVID gives us a good example of how response and recovery can be quite a grey line sometimes in this world. We need to respond to a situation, but that situation might come in ebbs and flows, and it might not come as one sudden event. It might come as a series of events. So community resilience is enabled when the public are empowered to harness local resources and expertise to help themselves and their communities to prepare, respond and recover from disruptive challenges in a way that complements the activity of Category 1 and Category 2 emergency responders. To unload some of these terms, Category 1 and 2 responders. Category 1 responders are primarily like emergency services, local authorities, the GLA and others. And Category 2 responders might be, for example, utility organisations that have a particular role. People like the Met Office, people like British Gas, etc. We need to plan and adapt to long-term social and environmental changes to ensure their future prosperity and resilience. So that is important to think about how we empower the public. But the thing I'm very focused on is this second point here, which I put in bold. Community resilience is all about working with civil society to create social value and achieve a more resilient UK. So the activity and approaches to build community cohesion and tackle loneliness also build community resilience to emergencies. So all of the work you might be doing to build community cohesion, to tackle loneliness, to support communities will build stronger community resilience. All of that energy put into communities helps in emergencies. Everything is about relationships. Emergency resilience activity should be aligned with more general resilience building activity and vice versa. It's really, really important. And this is all from the Community Resilience Development Framework from the Cabinet Office. And some of you may be aware that in autumn or winter this year, we will get the UK Resilience Strategy published. And a big focus of that UK Resilience Strategy published by the government will be on whole of society resilience. How do we all work together as we increasingly face difficult situations and emergencies? So some of you may be aware that how we pull together in London on resilience is through something called the London Resilience Partnership. The Civil Contingencies Act 2004, I believe, really lays down the legislation for what and how we deal with emergencies. So many of you might have heard of like COBRA at kind of a government level, and that's the panel that comes together to deal with emergencies nationally. In London, there is something called the London Resilience Forum, and the London Resilience Forum basically includes all of the Category 1 and 2 responders and other partners to respond to emergencies. And the London Resilience Forum sets the strategy and work plan for how we respond to emergencies. Underneath that, There is the London Resilience Programme Board, which does some of the operationalisation of the strategy. And there are sector panels of different sectors, including utilities, the voluntary sector, and the faith sector. And then there are each borough by borough resilience forums, where the local authority in your area, some of you maybe, often coordinate partners at a more local level to coordinate information sharing and create preparedness plans for how we respond to emergencies. So in community resilience world, the two things to really focus on, and the things I'm focusing on and the GLA is focusing on changing and supporting, are the sector panels, particularly the voluntary sector panel and the faith and belief sector panel, and the borough level response focus. So through those borough resilience forums is incredibly important when considering community resilience. At the moment, there is recognition that both of these things, the sector panels and the borough resilience forums, could improve on how we work with communities effectively. And this is really, really, really important, because to work with communities effectively, we need to work in partnership and we need to build trusted relationships, and that takes some time. So there is a proposal that we are working through the London Resilience Forum and through the GLA and through partners, of a new way of working. This new way of working will overtake the kind of voluntary sector panel and faith sector panel, and will create a new London Community Emergencies Partnership, where the community, voluntary, equalities and faith sectors will come together to respond cohesively and to really unite and operationalise how a response to an emergency occurs. So this is being led by our lovely partners, London Plus, who some of you may know is the infrastructure organisation for London's community and voluntary sector. So volunteer centres locally and voluntary community sector councils will come together through London Plus. Equally, this is a partnership with Voluntary Community Sector Emergencies Partnership. They are a national organisation that was set up by British Red Cross in response to Grenfell, terror attacks and others that happened 2016, 2017, 2018. These two organisations will come together to form and lead this new London Community Emergencies Partnership. The partnership will be very open. That's one thing to say. We'll be very open for community, voluntary sector, equalities and other specialist organisations to come in and be part of. This circle kind of represents some of that. So what do we mean by that? We mean the emergency organisations like British Red Cross, like London Search and Rescue, like St John's Ambulance, others. It will also include local councils of voluntary service, local volunteer centres, specialist volunteer organisations like equality organisations, migrant-based organisations supporting kind of migrant communities across London, and other specialists. And it will include the faith and belief sector panel, which will be pulled into this kind of environment to make sure a faith and belief lens is given. And many of you will know that, you know, faith and belief, places of worship, are at the forefront often of responding to emergencies. And we saw that extensively during the pandemic, and we're seeing that right now in dealing with some of the emergencies in London, including the Bethnal Green explosion and fire, the Pollard's Hill explosion, and the Islington floods that all happened very recently. So London Plus and VCS Emergency Partnership will form this new partnership, and people across the voluntary community sector will be invited to be part of it. It will have a steering group, which will be led by the directors of London Plus and the VCS Emergencies Partnership. It will link into the London Resilience Forum and the GLA. And through the London Resilience Forum, we'll link in, obviously, through boroughs. There will be monthly touchpoint meetings for the overall partnership and quarterly capability events that look at how do we respond to emergencies. And there'll be a London Slack channel that does, there's a Slack channel already for Voluntary Community Sector Emergencies Partnership that some of you may know of, but this will be a London specific Slack channel that will coordinate this emergencies partnership. This will be funded by the GLA, will be funded by London councils, and will be funded by City Bridge Trust. all going well and all of us going through all the hoops and hurdles that funding requires, as you can imagine. What does this look like in a response? So many of you will know that sometimes a strategic coordination group will be stood up to strategically coordinate across partners in London or at a local level to respond to an emergency. When a strategic coordination group, an SCG, or a gold group of one of the emergency services or the GLA is set up, they will call the new kind of staff within this new LSEP, London Community Emergencies Partnership, to set up a response team. The response team will be specific to the response that's happening. So, for example, if the response is happening in Barnet, the Barnet Voluntary Service, the Barnet Volunteer Centre, Barnet specialist organisations will be invited to be part of this response team. Equally, if this is affecting across London, it may be some of those big emergency partners and others that kind of come into this response team. It will all depend on the situation. Every situation is different, and different people will need to be involved in the coordination. So that is really a fly through this new London Community Emergencies Partnership that will come into being hopefully this winter. We are also really, really wanting to understand and build relationships at a local level. So these borough resilience forums are incredibly important. Local authorities have local authority emergency planning teams. Some of you might be in those teams, or you may know people in those teams that are here today. And we want to build our understanding. So we know, we've already done a survey of borough resilience forums through the London Resilience Group, that things could be improved on relationships with community, voluntary sector and faith and belief. We want to understand more deeply the connections with local authorities. We want to understand the connections to borough resilience forums, and we want to understand connections to other statutory partners at local level and how the community and voluntary sector is pulled together. London Plus will be undertaking a survey of the voluntary community sector councils and volunteer centres of what their emergency planning and what their relationships look like at a local level to local authority emergency planning teams and borough resilience forums. The London Borough's Faiths Network will be engaging with borough multi-faith forums and looking at how engaged they are in this space at a borough level. So while there's investment happening at a regional level, we also want to understand and invest in a borough level. So we have a proposal that is going through at the moment for a specific community resilience fund. This proposed seed funding would be in collaboration with local authority emergency planning teams. And local authority emergency planning teams are coming together next week to hear more about this. So if some of you are here already, that you're getting a bit of a, I don't know what to call it, not a surprise, yeah, whatever. And there's 4 key focuses this fund will focus on. So we want to improve communication channels at a local level. We want to improve relationships at a local level. So knowing basically who to call when there is an emergency through the community and voluntary sector. We want to improve data and insight sharing between partners locally. That can be a big challenge. How do we manage needs assessments when there's an emergency is incredibly important. And increase community preparedness for emergency. So while we want to be able to respond effectively, we need to make sure we have preparedness at the forefront of our minds to be able to respond effectively. We need to create those plans of how we respond. So the focus will be connecting VCS councils, borough resilience forums and local authorities. We'll be funding the VCS partners to do this piece of work, which they wouldn't be able to do without some resource. The projects could focus on, for example, creating emergency mobilisation plans. In other parts of the country, VCS partners do have emergency mobilisation plans. I'm not aware of anywhere in London having something similar in joint collaboration with local authorities. So this might pull some of that into what we're doing. But I'm really interested to hear in a moment of what you have in place already. And this will fund 10 to 12 pilot projects. So we won't be able to cover every London borough at this stage, but we will want to shine a light on at least 10 to 12 kind of projects through this resilience fund. So that's the end of me talking. And this is really like kind of a big overview of some of the work that's happening that I wanted to kind of tell you all about. But over to you, I suppose, now. What does community resilience look like in your borough, or what you're doing? That's my big question to you all, rather than you just listening to me waffle on. So what does community resilience look like for you?
That's great, Clifford. And we're going to go into breakout rooms in a sec. But kind of what I suggest we do kind of before we do that is if we all take 2 to 3 minutes to just off the top of our heads, kind of what does community resilience look like for us in our borough, so we can kind of crowdsource all of that for Clifford, and then we'll have some kind of deeper discussions in the breakouts. And I'll kind of pass Clifford between different breakout rooms so you can jump in. But let's take the next 2 to 3 minutes until past. And if everyone could put in what it looks like in their borough, whatever kind of role or position you are in the borough, you don't need to have all the knowledge about what's going on, but kind of from where you're sitting, whether you're local authority, voluntary sector, what does it look like? And answers in the chat. Have until past. Some good comments so far. Stuff to unpack in the kind of in the breakout rooms. There's an interesting provocation here from Kevin. Community resilience happens when no one needs to say we need community resilience here. Interesting. And yeah, how it feels for different sectors as well, which is really interesting. And some capacity issues. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, there's one thing, the what we all want to do together, the other, which is, and I guess partly there's something about the impacts of the multiple impacts of community resilience then stretch people's capacity even more than they have done. It's not just a flood that happens once every 5 years. It's everything else piling on top of each other and things that aren't going away. So what we're going to do now, keep the comments coming, because that would be really helpful for Clifford, and you can keep adding them into the chat during the breakout rooms. But we're going to go into breakout rooms and continue this conversation about what does community resilience look like in your borough, how does it work in your borough? Again, you don't need to know about the formal processes, but more your perspective on it. That might be about emergency planning, it might be about climate change, it might be about working with different types of communities, it might be working with businesses. We've had comments here about role of universities, and then maybe something about the challenges and opportunities. People have mentioned these in the chat already, and I think no doubt that'll be really important for the GLA as well, in terms of how the GLA and potentially those pilots might tackle those challenges that can then help other local areas as well. So I'm going to create some rooms. I think these automatically allocate to you all. There's no sophisticated system to this, and we'll come back at 10:10 for some final reflections on that, and then maybe next steps from Clifford in terms of what happens next on the community resilience work. Right, I'm going to open all those rooms, and Clifford, I'm going to see if I can move you around some different rooms as well, so you can get a bit of insight on what people are saying.